Hey man, what voltage do you run that machine at? Hey, Shaka Bras, welcome to our little show, everybody, the Fireside Tattoo Podcast, the official podcast of the Fireside Tattoo Network. In case you didn't know that, it's our own little corner of YouTube. It's a little nook. It's maybe like a cranny, but it's basically a little spot where we just try to help tattooers to solve interesting tattoo problems, and maybe every once in a while a tattoo collector wanders in and they make more educated decisions whenever they're choosing an artist. And if both of those things happen, then we did our job. So that little intro that I just did is a teaser for today's episode. This is a continuation of our conversation with Carson Hill of Neuma Tattoo Machines. And if you haven't seen the first two episodes, I would recommend that you go back and watch part one and part two, although this one could stand alone, but I think you'd get more out of it if you go back and just kind of watch them as a whole. There's still several more to come. There's actually a lot more content than I realized. I don't know how many episodes. Originally, I said like 3 to 5, but this is 3, and we're still just scratching the surface of all of the stuff that we got into. There's just so much that I almost don't want to leave anything out. But I also don't want this series to go on for the next year, so I'm going to have to solve that problem, I guess, on my own. Will depend a little bit on your feedback and what you're getting out of these episodes if you like them, and I'll just keep rolling with them if you do like them. But if you find yourself completely burnt out on machine talk, machine technology, all of that kind of stuff, then maybe we'll change gears a little bit. I'll just let you guys give me feedback, and then we'll make the call. So anyways, that first little opening teaser about voltage, that is one of the most common questions that we get on our channel. It's one of the most common questions that Carson gets as a machine builder, and I'm sure if you've been tattooing for any period of time, you've gotten that question a lot too, and probably asked that question. It's not a stupid question. I ask it all the time. If there are people who use the same machine that I do, I find myself pretty often asking what voltage they're running it at. What you'll find as we go through this discussion is that there's just not a one-size-fits-all answer to that question. So we're going to dive into a lot of the variables that'll help you to determine what voltage you should be running your machine at. All right, really quickly, I'm going to run through our sponsors before we get going on the show. The first one is Neuma. Carson Hill has been kind enough to sponsor this series. And if you are interested in checking out a Neuma 4, I believe there's a 10% discount with the code Fireside. This machine is awesome. I've learned so much by using the interchangeable cams and the different, not just the different stroke lengths, but the stroke profiles. And we'll get more into that as this series goes along. But link in our video description below. Use the code Fireside, get 10% off of the Neuma 4. I think I just spit right into the camera right there. TSM Pro is also sponsoring today's episode. You've heard me talk about them several times now, and I hope you'll check them out and see what they can do to help simplify your life as a tattooer. They handle a lot of automation. They automate a lot of the things that we need to be doing as business owners, but we are not doing. They help with our calendar, with our scheduling, client reward systems, automated, well, I hate to say automated because they're not really, but responses, timely responses to inquiries through social media and things like that. If you're not good at getting back with people who are reaching out about tattoos, you really should look into some of TSM Pro's services, particularly their automation service, which really just solves that problem for you right off the bat. And I think that the promo code Fireside, or if you use our affiliate link, that will get you $50 a month off of that service, which is a huge discount. It's like a big chunk of the actual cost of the service. Our last sponsor is Reinventing the Tattoo. Guy Aitchison and his online learning platform. They're putting out tons and tons of great content every single day. They've got a super cool little app on your phone now, and it constantly pops up and tells me who's live on Reinventing the Tattoo. So-and-so is leading a drawing group. Someone's leading a discussion panel. This person is teaching you how to tear down and rebuild coil machines. Like there's a course that's going on that you can go back and start fresh on. I think it's in the middle of it. What am I trying to say? It's live. It happens each week, but if you subscribe now, you can go back to module 1 and go back through this entire course where basically you build a Paul Rogers style tattoo machine with like spare parts. Ideally, there's stuff laying around your studio that you can build this thing without having to go out and buy parts. Sounds really cool. I haven't gone through it, but I intend to. That's it for our sponsors. One last thing I would say is this show is also brought by Fireside, brought to you by us. We do have online courses. I don't talk about them enough, but we've got painting workshops with Nick Baxter, Still Life Painting, the great Dan Marshall, one of the great plein air watercolor painters and really great tattooer also, by the way. We have a 3-day watercolor, plein air watercolor workshop that we've distilled down to about 3 or 4 hours. And these things are not expensive at all on our website. I would encourage you to go check them out. Finally, we have our foundations course, which is a foundation drawing course that is geared towards tattooing. If you jump in and buy foundations now, I think it's only like $39. We're doing a complete reboot, reshooting the entire thing and bringing it kind of up to date in the digital world and making it a little more tattoo focused and less drawing course focused. I think we're gonna, I think people who have gone through the old version of foundations and tried out this new version, which you'll get for free if you already own foundations, by the way. We're just gonna shoot you the new version, and I hope that you'll go through it again and provide some feedback for us. But this new version of foundations I really think is a huge step up from the first time around. Just a lot of what I've learned over the year, video quality, production quality, things like that. We're not the best in our original foundations course, and I think it's gonna come a long way. I hope you'll be pleasantly surprised with the new foundations course. And you could get yourself a Fireside t-shirt or a coffee mug or any number of other things. So anyways, let's get to this episode. I hope you enjoy it, and I'll talk to you at the end. Let me ask this. And when I was a beginning tattooer, I remember someone telling me, and it stuck with me, I don't know if it's true or not, but whenever I turned up my power supply on my Coil, they said, I said, I'm running the machine faster. And they said, you're not running the machine faster, you're increasing the amount of force. And I thought, well, those things should go together, right? If it's increasing the force, then it's pulling, and a result of that would be an increased speed. Moving that to rotaries, if we're increasing voltage, we're increasing both the force that the needle is being shot at, and then also the number of rotations per minute, or however you want to measure it, correct?
Yeah. So that's another big difference between coils and rotaries. I think that with a coil, it is speeding up a little bit, but not in the same way that a rotary does. So when you're turning up the voltage, you're not necessarily turning up speed, you're turning up power, With a rotary, they're linked. So speed and torque you can't detach one from the other, which is unfortunate. I've thought about those before. Like, it would be really great to be able to turn up the speed or turn up the torque, but maintain the speed. And you can by changing motors, but you can't do it on the fly from a power supply or something like that.
Let me pause it right there for just a second, because I think this is an important point. And it's something that I had never really thought of this way until Carson mentioned it. And it illustrates yet another huge difference in the way that rotary machines operate as opposed to coils. So the statement that I made was that whenever I was a beginning tattooer and I was turning up voltage, I thought I was speeding up the machine. I was told that I'm not necessarily speeding the machine up. What I'm doing is I'm causing these coils to pull this armature bar down harder. I'm increasing the force because I'm increasing the voltage, which might increase the speed, how fast they pull this armature bar down to the coil. But as soon as that connection is broken right here, it doesn't matter what voltage the machine was at. These coils are no longer magnetized. So the travel back is whatever the time it takes to travel back, regardless of the voltage. Now, if it pulled extra hard, it may spring back a little bit harder, but they're not directly linked, as opposed to a rotary machine where the speed of the machine is directly linked to the force of the machine, that you can't separate those two. So I just wanted to try to illustrate that because I thought it was an interesting point, and it seems perfectly clear whenever you think about it that way. I had just never considered it that way.
Do you want to talk about voltage real quick? Because I feel like everybody in the world asks about voltage.
Yes. Yeah, let's do that.
There isn't a specific answer, and that's why, I've noticed a lot of artists and even manufacturers will get annoyed with that question, like, oh, what volt are you running? Because there's so many different variables. For example, you've got cartridge tension, like each cartridge has a different amount of tension. And then you've got different skin types, so your voltage is going to vary for both of those two variables. And then there's different machines have different motors that are wound for, so you can have a 6-volt winding that's set up for 9 volts. You can have a 9-volt winding that's set up for 9 volts. You can have a 9-volt winding that's set up for 12 volts. You can have a 12-volt winding. You can have a 24 winding that's set up for 12 volt. There's all these different motor variables as well. So there's really no like one answer fits all, or even, and people ask me this all the time, and I'll give them a wide range, and they want more information, which I get it. That's what human conditions. We want information, especially something that we're really interested in, like tattooing. So then in that case, I'll just tell them what I use personally, but it has to come with a little bit of a disclaimer or a description, because okay, I'll use this roughly for coloring and this for shading and this for lining, this variation, right? Depending on the considerations. But I'm a fast tattooer. My hand moves really fast, so maybe start around here and then adjust up and down to kind of until you figure out what works for you, kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I've typically started low and worked my way up. It's just kind of the way that I started out with coils, and with coils, luckily you have the audible part of it. You can tell when it's at least running at enough voltage to, you can tell what voltage actually makes it sound like it's running consistently. Whereas with rotaries, it sounds consistent at whatever voltage actually makes it turn, which makes it a little trickier.
I also think there's a specific cadence for every artist. So like if I do circles like this, or if I do circles like this, I'm going to want different speeds, so I think that plays a big part. And you want to find that like harmonious cadence between the pokes and the circles that you're making.
Right. So we'll see when we buy machines, voltage, recommendations. This operates from whatever the recommended operating voltage for this machine is 6 to 9.5 or whatever it is. Do you typically recommend, I know people are asking you about your machine, but just in general, do you have a starting point? Like I normally 6.5 is kind of where I start and I move up and down from there. Or do you start low and work your way up and try to get away with the lowest possible voltage that you
like for any machine? Or
yeah, if you were just taking a machine out of the box and it was the first time that you used it, what would your approach be?
It depends on the machine, because it's literally like, I actually have a warning note in my machines.
I remember seeing that. Yeah.
Telling people like, be careful, because a lot of times, like the machine they were using before this might have been a 12 volt and they ran it at 14 volts, and now they're plugging in a 9 volt and at 4, that's too much, Right. So depending on the machine, so let's say it's a 9 volt motor that's set up for 9 volts, that I would say start maybe at 6.5, and then go up or down. And that's pretty fast. I wouldn't necessarily start really low and work my way up. I would start in the middle. Maybe if it was a 12 volt, I might start around 9 or 10 and just see what it feels like and adjust from there.
Right. I know you're not designing and building motors yourself, but you've said a couple of times if it's a say a 12 volt motor set up for 9 volts. So I understand what, if you set up if you have a 24 volt motor, that its potential is 24 volts. How do you throttle it down? Like, how do you set up a 12 volt motor for 9 volts? So
that's the work of the electrical and the guys that work for the motor company. I honestly don't know how to answer how exactly they do that, but I know you can set up, you tell them what voltage range you want to be running it at, and it isn't necessarily the winding that you want. It's important to operate an electric motor the way that it's supposed to, the way that it was set up to operate for the range. If you are running it too high, then you're putting extra wear on bearings and stuff like that. But if you're running it too low, well, then there's current coming in and it needs to go somewhere, and it can overheat and it can burn it out that way. So it really does depend on the motor, the way that it's set up, and all of that to make sure that it's that it's operating in the right conditions.
That seems to be the case in most kind of mechanical and electrical scenarios you find yourself in. I recently, or a few years ago now, I went through HVAC, like a crash course in HVAC. And I always wondered why you don't just oversize the units, your central heat and air unit. Like, why would you want one that might be underpowered in the heat of the summer or in the really cold parts of the winter? Like, why wouldn't you just overshoot it? And it's that same thing. If it's too big for the house, it cycles on and off at such a rate that you're going to prematurely wear down all of the electrical components and really just all the mechanical and electrical. On the other hand, if it's undersized, it's going to run all day long and you're going to burn it up from running too long. So it's just important to operate it within the range.
That's funny. This is the second video we've made, and both times you mentioned
it's like
the air conditioning.
You can tell what I spend all the rest of my time doing. It's like plumbing.
It must
and
be hot.
Air conditioning.
It must be hot where you live.
yeah, it's pretty hot in Memphis. It's true. I don't understand this next one. I'm gonna jump to the one just before it. Weight. How much weight is appropriate? What should the weight be? You're talking about the weight of the actual machine?
Yep.
Okay. Elaborate. What do you mean?
Well, so, I think that, okay, so remember when we tattooed with coils, you have the grip and then you have the coil. And if you had like one of the skinny grips, then the weight of that was harsher on your hand, right? So then we started using these fat grips. And I think what we noticed was like the big heavy steel grips, it planted that machine better in our hand. It made lining a whole lot easier because the weight wasn't like pulling you away from the skin, it was pulling you into it. And so I think, it's partly why I started making my machines with different metals and different sizes. I mean, obviously the sizes is more about preference at first, but making them out of different metals makes a pretty big difference. And so what I discovered was an aluminum grip machine, which is my lightest version. I end up having to like push into the skin to get the depth that I want. Where a stainless machine or brass machine, it has weight behind it. And so the machine's weight does most of the poking for me. And I'm really just moving it around and on the pattern of the art or whatever to it's more like I'm guiding it rather than like pushing and guiding.
Right. Yeah. One thing that stuck with me back around that same time that the person told me that I wasn't increasing speed, I was increasing the force of the coil machine, was that I remember them telling me, it's more like if you're stretching the skin appropriately, and like I'm talking back in coil days and heavy coils. So if you're stretching the skin appropriately, you're really more holding the machine out of the skin rather than pushing the needles into the skin. And I remember trying to think about that when I was struggling with things like just getting solid color or fluid lines, thinking like, I'm not, the way the machine should be doing this work and I should just be guiding it and holding it back a little bit. But with modern rotaries, that's not the case at all. At your point, you're really having to like press them in there sometimes.
Yeah, some of them. Yeah. And, the only difference is like, let's say, because this one is a new one I just made. It's meant to look like a coil grip, actually.
Oh, yeah, I like that.
It's cool. Super heavy.
Is it knurled? Is that what I see? Is it got knurling on it? Yeah, that's cool.
It's basically just like an old coil machine grip.
Right.
But so I also have some that are like, I don't have one laying around, but this is my 1 1/3, and there's another one that's like 1.5 inches. And I make those out of brass and stainless as well. And anytime somebody orders one of those in brass, I always call them and make sure because, or I have somebody call them and make sure because the thing weighs, the heaviest one we make is 370 grams. And so that's like 13 ounces.
Oh, wow.
So, and that's just in your hand, this big,
Yeah.
So, it's one thing to like, if you're working below you and doing a little tattoo, it'll probably help make the tattoo experience so awesome. You'll love it. But let's say you're working on someone's back and you're having to hold that thing up for an 8-hour session. Like I wouldn't recommend it. Like that. So, there's different things to consider when you're talking about weight, but like if I were to, so in my ideal, so I have 12 different weights of tattoo machines. It's all just the one tattoo machine, but there are 12 different variations of the weight. And
all through the grip, all through the interchangeable grips.
Yep. Yeah. So like my ideal one's the middle size with the steel, because then it's heavy enough that it's it feels planted and stable, and And maybe I'll put it, I would change it for aluminum if I was working above, on a high part of a back or something like that.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I like that planted sort of feel.
Yeah. That's interesting. And I don't know why I didn't think of it that way, but I've been watching, look through social media, I've been watching all the new grips that you've been putting out. And I thought, for one thing, it's just aesthetic. And then also the actual circumference or diameter or whatever of the grip. But I wasn't really thinking about the weight, the different weights, even though I knew they were being made out of different materials. It's just not something I really considered. So,
they vary from 115 grams to 370.
Oh, wow.
So it makes a pretty significant.
Yeah. What that kind of rolls right into to this next point, the disposables versus sterilizing grips and machines. Whenever we did that first talk with that first podcast last fall, you were talking about having releasing a disposable grip that was basically just like the end of the grip. Have I missed it? Have you done that yet? Or
no, not yet. The design is complete. The manufacturing was kind of on hold for a minute there.
Yeah.
Last year was a little bit of a mess. I think a lot of people can relate with that. And so we did have to kind of put it on the back burner for a minute there, but the design is now complete and we'll be going into tooling next. Probably, I'm still looking at, early mid-spring before I can start producing those.
Okay. So, and if I'm remembering what you said right, it's not the entire grip. There'll be the permanent grip or the whatever you call it. The permanent grip would be some percentage of it that held the spring in place, that held the cam in place, and then somehow that disposable piece clamps onto that, and that's where the receptacle for the.
You know what? I have a prototype.
Oh, sweet.
Give me one sec. I'll grab that.
Perfect.
It's similar in that, like this one, it's straight. The rest of mine all have some kind of a curve. So that's the first difference. Except it wouldn't have a knurl. It would just be a steel straight tube like that, but a little bit thinner because that wall's kind of thick. But it ultimately looks like this. This is a plastic 3D print. Okay. So inside is the spring and the thread. So the inner housing screws into it, and you still do your adjustment like that. And then on the outside, you've got this thick thread, and it has like a stopper kind of a situation on it. So then this part is the disposable section. It just screws onto that like that.
Okay.
So then that portion that you're gripping on is disposed of, but not this. This part's steel and stays.
Okay.
That way we didn't have to put the spring in the disposable and the thread in the disposable, except for just this fat thread.
Right. Well, seeing that example answered my question. Actually, I was thinking that the disposable piece, rather than the permanent piece kind of inserting way into it and the disposable kind of wrapping the outside, I was thinking it might just lock to the end, and I was wondering what effect that would have on the weight and what metals you could actually use for the permanent piece, because I assume that the disposable piece is very light.
Yeah. So this way we definitely maintain that weight,
right,
and the weight being in the closest to the skin.
Yeah.
And then the grip itself is actually going to be in two parts too. So you have this section, which is plastic, and this section, which is silicone.
Okay.
Cushy kind of.
Yeah. That's awesome. I can't wait to try those.
So nobody's actually seen that yet.
Sweet. The hot scoop.
All right, let's call it right there. See, I'm like Oprah, get the inside scoop on stuff you wouldn't know otherwise. So like I mentioned earlier, we have plenty more of this conversation with Carson, and I don't know how far to take it. We really took some deep dives in a lot of different directions, and I think all of it was really, really interesting. I will rely on your feedback as just how far we go with this series. If you'd rather see it as just a hour and a half long, whatever is left, kind of podcast, or if you'd rather me to continue to break it up into these little manageable pieces where it's easier to kind of digest, I'm happy to do that either way that you guys would like to see it. That is it. Thank you again for supporting the Fireside Tattoo Network. You can support us by supporting our sponsors in the links below. You can also subscribe to our channel somewhere around here. Support us on Patreon. There's all kinds of things you can do to support us. We'd like back rubs. We'd like you to mail us nice gifts. Thank you. We'll see you next time.